Okay, hello. Welcome back, and welcome to this final furlong, final session of the OSS live sessions. And as Petra summed it up very well, the first live session, not this one, but in general, in 2 years. So the final session is about male and female voices of authority. We've got a lot of different male and female voices here tonight. And I'll just let you introduce yourselves and your background.
For the third time today. My name is Mario Platt. I'm the CISO at Worldwide Global, a small consulting company. And I do fractional CISO with different types of clients, mainly fintech and medtech.
So I'm Didar Gelici. I'm senior manager at Just Eat Takeaway, focusing on risk and compliance.
Hi, my name is Ayse Vlok. I'm a cloud security engineer at justeattakeaway.com. My background is linguistics, applied linguistics, education. And then after I joined security industry, I had been involved in security operations, governance, and now engineering.
See whether I've got this right. Looks like I have. Good evening, everybody. Alan Jenkins. I'm the old guard representative, come from a traditional security background, ex-military, 21 years, been in commercial commerce, 16 years, Group CISO of a FTSE 100, the wrong side of a breach. It's not much I haven't done in security. And here to contribute, but also to learn about how we encourage different voices, not the same voices.
Thank you. So we're exploring how voices of authority are projected in cyber, comparing the amplitude of male and female voices in cyber. So just to set a bit of context about authority, who would you say are the main figures of authority within your cyber community? Let's go with Didar.
Difficult question, because I think it's very regional as well. Like the names that come to my mind are, the female ones are very regional. There are people who we all know from the traditional security world who have made a name. Shall I say names or something? I don't know. Daniel Missler, you'd know him probably. I can't think of any names right now. But let's talk about the women. I'm inspired by Eliza May Austin. You might know her. Chani Sims. We have Jane Franklin. We have Tanya Yanka. She's American, or Canadian, sorry. But yeah, I know them from our community. So I don't know how widely they are known. So how do you define authority?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. From my perspective, I look at everyone as being an authority, because I'm comparatively new and from a different sector. But I'm wondering, how more established figures see authority, and what names spring to mind first? Mario, maybe.
Yeah, so there are some names that kind of would come up all the time. Bruce Schneier, Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote the CISO Compass book, and a lot of his co-workers. So generally speaking, at least from people that I see getting published a lot, right? They kind of they tend to be male and older, and white, generally speaking. But in terms of women, so obviously being here, the co-writer of Aaron's book, Kelly Shortridge, she's brilliant. She's the woman that I most follow. Everything she writes about. Yeah, and a lot of the women that
Liz Rice
mentioned as well. Liz Rice, yeah. Which I think is also quite an interesting thing, because at least a lot of the voices that we There are, at least in my own kind of bubble bias, whatever maybe, there's a lot of we see a lot more women voices right now, but more focusing on aspects of culture, etc. Right? People like Tanya Juncker, like Liz Rice, they're really in the technical weeds, right? And I think we really need voices on both areas.
Is it on? I was gonna say I don't have any names in my mind. I haven't really been in the industry too long enough, and I've been in many parts of the industry for the past 4 years. But Liz Ross definitely came to my mind as well, like, especially with the recent work that I'm working on. But what I consider as authority is a little bit different than, than the generic traditional perception of it. It's a bit of a problematic word for me. But there are people I look up to, there are people I learn from. I've tried to do in the entirety of my time in this industry is try and collect sort of quotes, memories, advice, guidance from anyone around me, whether they are in place of authority by title or not. And that's what I've been doing. There is each sort of segment of advice or inspiration I got from each person that I sort of looked up to, because no one is entirely perfect. I guess that's sort of the mentality I have around role model. Yeah.
Thank you, Ayse. And Alan, I can see that you've got something to say about this.
Yeah, if I may, I think there are two aspects to this. One is about what do we mean by authority? To me, authority comes in two forms. One is a position, a rank, a role, years in the industry. Particularly if you're starting out, you kind of look up to those who are there ahead of you. But as I've become more senior in the industry, I tend to listen more to what's being said and then who's saying it. Because I'm more interested these days in terms of content. Because whilst I've done lots of things, I know I don't know everything. I'm kind of into that second level of knowledge. I know what I know what I don't know, and I start to look for those who know more. So, as an example, I'm going to pick on somebody from the audience who's not expecting it. I looked at Petra as an authority, and I became aware of Petra probably 2 years ago when Denise started to talk about his hiring process and how he introduced the need for a presentation into it rather than just the CV and the traditional interview. And then he shared Petra's presentation to a community of peers and I hesitate to say seniors. And it was about mapping. You did the Wardley map, and I can't remember the actual topic, but it was the first time I'd looked at a Wardley map. So I looked at Petra. Now, you wouldn't expect that. I've been in this game for 30 years. She's been in it 5 minutes. And sorry, that's not meant to be patronizing, even though that's how it came across. But the point is, I learned from Petra. So from somebody from perhaps who would be thought to be an authority, no, I've turned it around. I listened to Petra. And that's what I enjoy about our industry. It's why I moved out of physical and security and operations into cyber quite deliberately, because it was new ground. I wasn't just reapplying age-old lessons going back to Sun Tzu 2,500 years ago. It was another authority. I needed to apply those principles into the new domain, and I don't have all the answers, but I do know which questions to ask, and I do know how to gauge answers, and that's how I start to apply who do I look up to, who do I listen to, who do I pay attention to. So, to throw some names out, likes of Phil Venables, Phil Huggins, absolutely. Jane Franklin was mentioned earlier. I met Jane 20 years ago when I was drawn to the graphics, the marketing, to the way Corsair had put together one of their solutions, which I was in the stand-up team for the MOD CERT at the time, and we were looking for something along those lines. I wasn't drawn to the function. I was drawn to the way it was depicted. And you wouldn't necessarily expect that either. But, I've now known Jane for 20 years, supported her. I'm one of those males supporting the source and all she's doing with women in security, because I have a 21-year-old daughter. And that's made me think about this whole perspective, because we think differently, we behave differently. Some of that's about hardwiring, some of that's about environment, but we just need to think about authority isn't just about rank, position, and time in service.
And I think it's interesting that you said that this is a new dynamic sector, which it is. But I think also there have been criticisms that hierarchies and male-dominated systems have been transferred into cyber. So thinking about this life cycle that we're in, the point in the cyber sector life cycle, what sort of changes or improvements have there been to amplify women's voices and also opportunities in that time? I think maybe I'd like to ask that question to Didar.
So we talked about this in the first session of today as well a little bit. We now have lots of different communities, and we help each other out because, and I'm a big example of this. 5 years ago, if you said I would be sitting here in a panel, that wouldn't have happened. But I saw other women in the security just being themselves and doing what they do good and not being afraid of showing that to the world. And that really changed my perspective of, and my confidence in myself and being myself. So I do that in my communities as well, not me, but we all do this in our communities so that there's more women who get encouraged. We help each other. We network, we pick each other up.
And Ayse, what experience have you had coming into this community recently of that?
First of all, I think that the fact that we're talking about it right now means progress, right? And it's been talked about a lot. I did not know what to expect before I came into the industry. It was just unknown to me. Like the percentage of women in the industry just was not really relevant. Couldn't make sense of it. And then I got in and I had experiences of many sides, and I just at times couldn't even relate it to being stemmed from gender differences or, you know, seeing female in different ways, because I'm new to the industry and could be anything. Right? Could be that I don't know. Like I just cannot speak up. I just cannot, share my opinion on it, not because I'm sort of shut down due to whatever biases we have. But even for the last few years, I can see massive progress in people speaking up about it. And I think speaking up and having alliance with, and this is the case for any diversity, not just male, female, and other genders, but also other types of diversity. Alliance is really important. And I see a lot of improvement in the last few years in that, people speaking up instead of me before I even have to say something. Yeah.
Thank you, Ayse. And I think, Alan, you've been in the industry for some time. Have you seen any shifts in behavior or any points in time where this shift started to happen?
Yeah, most definitely. And I'm just going to echo that. I think we've come a long way. You know, I've been in this industry since before we called it cyber. It was computer network defense and information security when I started. In fact, if I really go back, it was computer security, and that was a derivation of document security and some things we've done before. So that's the what and the how. What I've seen change is 2002 in the defense world. For us, diversity was Army, Navy, and Air Force in a joint outfit. There were no women, none. The closest we had was and I'm going to try and do the rank translation, was a senior manager of our defensive communication security outfit was a communications engineer, female, Air Force squadron leader. This is 2000 actually. So what's that, 22 years ago. Now we've got head of CISA in the US as a female, CyberGen. Head of NCSC in the UK as a female, Lynn. We've mentioned some names, but CISO at Lloyds Bank, CISO at BBC, females. So that transition has definitely happened, and I've only seen it accelerate in the last 5 years. Why? Because we need talent. There is absolutely no point in ignoring 51% of the population. And some of us have known that for some time, but there's been a shift. Some of that is about protectionism. Some of that is the men in those positions want to stay there because they're not ready to retire. So there's a protectionism that comes in, and that's as much against men as it is against women. The glass ceiling doesn't necessarily exist just for women in the space, but I think that's gone. I think there's I think it's a much more meritocratic space than it was. That doesn't mean we can give up and say the job is done, but I think we've reached that tipping point, and this is an example of it. To the point, we wouldn't have been talking about this 5 years ago. We possibly wouldn't have been talking about it 3 years ago, but we certainly wouldn't have been.
Why
10,
not?
because we didn't need to. The demand wasn't there.
We didn't need to.
No, the demand wasn't there. Security was still an afterthought for most outfits. What's really changed in the last 3 years in particular is the demand side on business has gone up.
Okay.
And that's why we have a shortage of people. That drives us to get new people. We can't keep tapping the same routes. Hence, Denise trying to get cybersecurity people, people into cybersecurity from outside, because we've got to go look for those talents in the far corners that we haven't done before.
No, I think that's a valid argument. But this idea of need to diversify and recruit more women. I don't know about cyber, but I think in the education sector, in the various business sectors, there's been a dialogue about encouraging diversity and promoting women into positions of authority and supporting them for some time now. So I'm just wondering, what other factors do you think, apart from need, may have hampered this? Maybe may have meant that within cyber, it's only within the last 3 to 5 years that there's been movement. Would there be other factors apart from demand?
I think the whole world is waking up. There's Black Lives Matter. There's more pride. The whole world is waking up to understand that the way the people thought about things as normal is not normal, and they need to acknowledge that there's not just one type of person. There are so many different types of people, and we're all okay, and we're okay to exist. So it's happening all over the world. So as cyber, we're benefiting from it because we are more able to speak up, because we know we will be supported. It's not just going to be one voice. We know there will be allies that come to rescue if we get attacked, for example. As a woman, if I get attacked in a meeting, I know someone will speak up and shut that person down.
Has that happened in the past?
Not to me. So, luckily not, but it happens still.
Maria, have you observed these things happening?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been also in the industry for 22 years now. So I've seen a bit of everything. I think it's worth kind of separating two issues that I think the other panelists have been talking about. I think there's one issue is about the promotion of women that have already probably been in the industry for a long time. So you probably wouldn't have people going directly into those roles if they didn't already have some kind of background or experience for a number of years, right? And then there's obviously the welcoming newcomers into the industry, right? So one of the big differences, and I've worked with not many, but when I started my career yeah, in 2000, the few women that existed, they were extremely thick-skinned, right? They dealt with a lot for being the only women, etc. So they had the type of they had to have. I'm not. Survival is the wrong word, but in order to do their jobs, when people started making misogynist jokes, etc., because they happened, right? They had to answer then and there to establish their position of, look, I'm here because I'm engineer and I'm as good as you, and that's not going to go, right? So it was, I think it only attracted a certain type of women with certain type of ways to handle themselves, right? Which luckily I think is no longer the case, generally speaking. I think there are some systemic issues at play as well, right? Up until, I think this happened a bit earlier in tech, maybe, but I would suggest that 10, 15 years ago, you just wouldn't see so many women in kind of more senior roles, because the idea of the woman is the mother and she's going to be the one that's staying at home, and it's going to be the father that's going to be the one pursuing the career, etc. Right? I think that's a systemic issue that is also now gladly changing, and that's why we see more women also applying for those roles and be successful in those roles. So there's the societal issues, I think, that are happening, that are enabling a lot of the women to occupy those posts and having all of the merit on getting them. I think then there are the issues about what's coming from bottom up, right? So welcoming new people, new women into the industry. And obviously there's still a lot of work to do, but the fact that we are now seeing, for instance, security conferences actually banning people that have misogynistic type of behaviors, etc., that sends a message to the industry of what's acceptable and not acceptable. I'm very glad that we're seeing that. It's bad that the action needs to be taken, but on the other hand, it's also good to see that when security conferences are seeing that type of behavior, that it's being dealt with decisively. There are codes of conduct that are being enforced, so that hopefully that sends a message that women are welcome. And obviously, there's always more to do, but I think in terms of the grassroots, we're starting to see consistent application of some of these things and more to hopefully welcome more people, and it has to go through education, access to education, and all of those other things.
And what sort of time frame have you seen the most change happening in?
The last 3 years.
Okay, so we're back
So,
to the 3
yeah.
to 5. Yeah.
Yeah, but, for instance, I think obviously there are many more indicators, but I don't think that we would have seen an enforcement around misogyny in security conferences more than 3 years ago. I think it happened, at least that I'm aware of, 3-4 times in the past kind of 3-4 years. But before that, it was just, yeah, people didn't talk about it. They, at least, maybe I'm not paying attention, but that's what I've seen.
Yeah, I think for me, I find that quite shocking that it's such a short time frame, which is why earlier, Alan, I was like, what? Because the pace of change in our society, we're still quite far behind on equality in various contexts, but that idea of the 3 to 5 years for me, compared to how far we've come in the last 100 is, it's shocking.
Okay, but I think we need some context. That we, as an industry, we've only really been existed for 30 years, right? You know, there wasn't much around computer security in the 80s.
Yeah.
The Morris worm was 88. That's what, 34 years ago. Medicine's been around for 1,000 years, but only been formalized as a profession for the last 300. And one of the things they had to do was to root out charlatans to go into the what's accepted practice. And yet we've only got homeopathy becoming accepted in the last less than 10 years. And I'm conscious we've got some Holland and Barrett in the room. So, herbal remedies, etc., was shunned until relatively recently. So I think we need to take the blinkers off, actually, and recognize that we're not the only ones who are playing catch up. If you look at engineering and the drive for STEM and women into engineering, it's no different to cyber. Absolutely no different to cyber. And yet I went through university in the late 80s. One of my colleagues was the first female combat-ready pilot in a tornado in 1994. Actually, sorry, correction, 1995. because in the military, women didn't go on the front line, didn't do combat roles. Now they can be in the special forces if they can pass the selection tests, and some have. So that wider societal change that Mario's talking about isn't just in our industry. We are reflecting what's going on around us. But I think because I've grown up with that, I've never had a problem with females on the team. 2008 was my first CSO role. Half my team were females, including my forensic investigator. So that's 14 years ago. It's not recent. So I think we've had some disparity in capabilities and roles that have been open, but I don't believe there's a glass ceiling anymore. If you've got the talent, if you've got the capability, and to some extent experience, and I think that's why we don't necessarily have as many females as we could in senior roles, because there is an element of time served. You wouldn't put a 21-year-old into a CISO role for a FTSE 100, but you might if they've got the talent and capability and can demonstrate it. And I think that's changed, literally changed.
No, that's a good point. And I think maybe this whole idea of the number of people, the number of women in cyber now, looking at the number perhaps doesn't really maybe fill out the picture of the experience of being a woman in cyber.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I think I'm going to contradict with myself with what I said earlier. Yeah, it's definitely progress that we're talking about it, but it's a dangerous spot, because if we're just talking about it and not doing anything about it, and recognizing things that we have been doing but being problematic for the other party, then we will just stay stuck in this talking phase, which is what usually is the case for anything that changes in the society. We're talking about biases, societal, we're talking about different cultures and cultures' perception around women. So new talent coming in is one thing. The numbers reflecting the number of society and equality in there is another. And also providing opportunities to women in progressing to leadership roles is another problem to look into. It's something that may or may not be because there haven't been a lot of women in the industry for a long time, but we need to stop and look around whether there are intentional blockers to women getting there. And then start talking about them, and then let's have enforcements in place, let's have encouragements in place, and let's make it a norm and rule, so that we can achieve where we would like to be. Yeah.
Thank you, Ayse. I think that's a really good point also about blockers. I'd like to ask Mario and Didar, what type of blockers have you either experienced or witnessed to women's progression within the sector?
I guess one of them is assuming that they might not want the role because they have kids or something, because they have family responsibilities. They might not want to it might be too stressful. It's just making assumptions on that person without asking them. One of the blockers.
And that's a good point. I think also you can say that would transfer to assumptions about men, that perhaps they don't want involvement in the family when they might. And Mario, how about you? Have you witnessed any?
Yeah, for sure. Particularly when it comes to management roles. So this is not something that I subscribe to, but I've heard in more than one company. So if it's a man saying things in a certain way, he's going to be called assertive. If a woman says the same things, she's going to be called abrasive, right? And it's the exactly same thing, maybe in the same context. And obviously that generates a type of missed opportunities that end up not happening as a result of the being perceived that way. And obviously that's an issue that needs to start with within the own teams, how we think about what talent is, Even if there's being assertive as a manager, I think is an important quality that one needs to have to be a manager. But as we do with any other type of person that is going to be considered for a more senior role, it's about training. It's about giving the exposure to the right context in which they can practice the skills, and it's building from there, right? It's not different, or it shouldn't be different from what we do with men. And I've got some experience in promoting women in my team, managing previous colleagues from different cultures, and how that whole thing sometimes is not at all easy.
I think, yeah, sorry, go on, Petra.
I want to risk being a bit controversial, but I want to add a little thing here. Firstly, I want to agree with Alan. Like, I think the context here is super important. Like Alan mentioned, medicine, for example, is a super old profession, and women have been taking over medicine only maybe the last 15 years. Like not even getting to equal numbers, but taking it over. But that's been the last 15 years. And if you compare the ratio of how old it is and how old cyber is, I think let's celebrate that we're actually not doing that bad. And I know that, you know, I don't want to risk like, you know, shutting down everyone else's experiences, but my experience actually coming from medicine where women are taking over. In medicine, there's way more misogyny, and in tech, I haven't actually experienced it. So I actually want to do some positive reinforcement and say, from my end, I think things are getting better, and I want to celebrate those companies who I worked in, you know, Job and Talent, Zava, Glasgow. Like from my end, you know, I have not experienced misogyny. I've been supported in telling my opinion. My voice was always heard. I know it has to do with my assertive personality as well, but but you know, what I want to say is, yes, we need to raise our voices and say there are still problems, but I think we should also be positive and mention how mention the improvements and celebrate the improvements. Sorry if I'm controversial.
Thank you, Petra. I think that's a really great point. I definitely also feel very lucky to be supported and feel supported right now. But looking at the broader picture, and particularly my background in education, I was reading recently The Authority Gap by Marianne Siegert, and she mentions some research that was carried out in, I think it was in American universities, comparing the experiences of academics in the tech departments who had changed gender. So the male to female, after a male to female transition, the participants in the study reported feeling ignored, sidelined, their career path was on a downward trajectory. But the female to male participants in the research reported quite the opposite. So I'm wondering how that can map on to cyber, being that it was a tech discipline. Are there any similarities, or have you experienced something similar that you were responded to differently because you are a woman instead of a man? Ayse and Didar?
I've been quite lucky, but I do hear other women's experiences who haven't been as lucky as I am. And maybe next time we'll get more of the women who have been unlucky. But do you want to add?
Yeah, I have experienced. I guess it's quite visible to see, at least when I started in my experience, it's visible to see the percentage of females in heavy tech side of security versus other parts of security. And when I first made the move from governance to security operations, and I was getting quite techy, I have noticed situations where not only was I not listened to, just blatantly ignored, but also certain things I had already mentioned and said in the team would be regurgitated or paraphrased and said back and then applauded. Certain situations where people would raise eyebrows if just because I would make certain remarks in an assertive way, and I'm quite similar. I can get a bit assertive in, in expressing my opinions and sort of speak up. It was enough for them to feel surprised, for me to feel like I was someone else in the team. And I'm talking about the times when I was the only female in the team, or only female in a meeting, and things like that. Usually I do not notice because I'm quite focused on the work and I don't look at, other aspects of the meeting, just talk about work. But I was also explicitly told, you're a woman, like you don't really need to strive that much, you can just make, enough living and get to a certain position, and that should be enough for you, an easy life. Why do you need the stress in your life? And there were situations, I feel like I'm so unlucky compared to you. There were some situations where I was, so I did a bit of like an experiment years ago, 2018, at Infosec. I was doing, and still am doing, my master's degree at Royal Holloway in information security, and I was standing at their stand, and I had a classmate with me who was male, and I was like, do you know what, let's walk around and ask them, this is what they have in place, and I want to know what the new technology is like. And at every stand I went around to, they handed me the goodies, and they just faced him, told him what the technology was, what their product could do for the organization he worked for, even though I inserted questions asking, for more information. The eye contact was there. So those are certain things that I have noticed in my experience.
I think that's really relevant, and it brings to mind, actually, there was a fireside chat by the future, I think it's Information Security magazine, with Lorna from Caps Lock, and she said exactly the same thing, that though she was a partner in the company, about 90% or more of the time when she was in discussions with clients, they were, or even suppliers, they would always address her male partner. I think that's something that the statistics that support this diversification of cyber perhaps don't reflect. I'm wondering if you've seen that as a man in cyber, that sort of dynamic happening where the attention goes directly to the male in the room. Mario.
So, look, I've got a conscience here. I'm male, white, and old, and all those sort of things. But what I've just heard described, and I've definitely, it's not unique to you. I've heard it elsewhere. My other half bought a car 2 weeks ago. I was with her. I'm a petrol head, and the salesperson wanted to talk to me. I said, no, she's the buyer. You talk to her. So it's not just cyber where that happens, and it's not just talks to the male in the room. I've seen it where the client has talked to the older consultant who's in the room, even though the senior was actually junior. So there's some biases here. There's some psychological, cultural, societal biases which are reflected in cyber just as they are in wider society. What I've seen in cyber is, to Petra's point, where in the last 3 to 5 years, those constraints, blockers, have almost been swept aside. Not completely, but I think we made a lot of progress where, given we've only been in this for 30 years, I think we made significant strides compared to others that have been around longer. That's not to say we haven't got further to go, we can't do more, but I do have a concern about positive discrimination. You know, this idea that a board should have 3 females out of 7 board members. I have a problem with that because I think it should be on merit. But we've also got to break through where glass ceiling is concerned and also recognize that actually globally it isn't a level playing field. There are some parts of the globe that are ahead, and I can assure you there are some parts of the globe that are still in the dark ages. So we've just got to recognize there are some wider issues in play. And to Petra's point, actually we've come a long way. And I think some of Petra's experience is she's come into the space in the last 5 years. If you talk to females in the room who've been in it for 10 years, they'll absolutely talk about glass ceilings and everything else. I think it's shifted. I've seen that. I'd like to think I played my part in that, but I've definitely seen a shift.
I think it's interesting what you say about positive discrimination, Alan, because I think as a woman, I would definitely not want to think that I'd landed in a job because of statistics or because there was some sort of quota that needed to be met. And definitely we all want to be where we are based on our merit. But I also think that that brings me back to the point that Maria made about how women are perceived as being, I don't know, not assertive like men or authoritative like men when they speak up. Perhaps there's a confusion between confidence and competence, which, you know, maybe they're not able to, or not able, but perhaps the audience is not able to perceive the competence because of pre-programmed bias. I think, Mario, I'd like to take that back to you.
I'm not much deep into that type of science than I am with other things, but I think generally speaking, voices that are deeper tend to command more authority, right? And men, by definition, usually have deeper voices, right? I think that definitely has, I think I would expect that to play a role. Obviously, and I think in engineering, there's other types of issues at play, right? The thing that was touted a long time ago that people didn't expect women to be good technically, etc. In GRC, I think the challenges are slightly different because particularly when GRC works so much based on knowledge about good best practices, right? It's very easy for someone with a deep voice just gets a question and spouts whatever best practice is expected without really having to think much about it, right? And that in itself commands a certain type of authority. That is also one of the reasons why I tend to employ women within my teams, which is they ask better questions. They're more willing to listen, generally speaking. It's not so much they are happy to be called out wrong without feeling that they failed, that they should have known the answer in advance. But obviously, I'm making here generalization. Not all men do this, but generally speaking, I think that's a skill. I don't know if it's nurture, culture, whatever that is, but that's usually a skill that I quite that I think teams with women benefit from.
Okay, so it's not about what they're saying; it's how they're saying it.
It's both, right?
Yeah.
It's also the ability to try and understand the context before kind of saying what things should be doing, right? Because particularly in GRC, it's been a function, generally speaking, that we've learned to operate with role authority, right? It's not even so much, I don't think about being man or woman, right? We are used to managing with role authority. We go into a room, we say, this should be like this, because otherwise we're not going to be compliant. So now someone else's job is to go and do it, right?
Yeah.
So that I think maybe facilitates an approach where if you combined with that have a deeper voice and you know the best practice off the top of your head, that probably generates that type of dynamic.
Okay, so deeper voice isn't just about the physical aspect, but about the experience. And I think also going back to how you say it, I know, Ayse, you've got a linguistic background. Perhaps is it the phrasing of the message, or is there?
So apart from personal experience and personally how I behaved versus how I changed myself over the time, and then found myself again, I just Googled it and I found a whole lot of not just studies, like academic studies, but also articles around how you can pose yourself from the words you use, the choice of words, how you articulate them, the tone of voice to body language in being assertive. And they found that females struggle with it a lot because they tend to use a lot more tentative language where there are a lot of could yous, please, would you mind, I was wondering, or even just pausing for validation, approval, you know, voicing your opinion and then turning around to see what the other is going to say, the person you see as authority or, you know, someone else. And there are a lot of studies showing that, you know, females struggle with it. And I guess this reveals how we perceive authority as well. So we are in our minds, we think authority requires that, right? It requires that get rid of the tentative language, say it direct, with a deep voice, with assertive language, and make yourself shown, you know, look as if you're really confident in what you're saying, even if you're 80%. And it works because it feeds into our idea of what authority should do. Sort of problematic because in leadership, do you really need that all the time? You know, either in leadership, do we need to be assertive, but also do we need to pause and listen more as well? And you know, maybe we need a shift of mind in terms of what we expect as well. And that's when we will be able to come to an agreement where we can be authentic ourselves, but at the same time we're listening to, our opinions are out there and they're taken seriously.
I see, Alan, you're champing at the bit there.
I am, because I want to support that, but I also want to put a cautionary note out. Don't just adopt the mannerisms of a male, all right? Because that's not the way to go. At least I don't think it's the way to go, because one of the things I value from the female members on my team, and indeed the other diverse talent on my team, is that they think differently to me. If there's one thing I have learned probably since coming out of the military, actually, it's to listen more. You know, I've been in the consulting space a lot. I've been consulting 101. You've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. There's a reason for that. You know, listen to what your client wants, play it back to make sure you've done that check of understanding. I want the female voices in my team to be assertive, but first of all, I want them to be confident that they can speak up. So, you know, make sure you don't just listen to the person with the loudest voice. You actually go around the team and ask for contributions for each and every one member of the team. And sometimes you'll have to nudge the quiet one in the corner. That might be a bloke, it's more often a girl, because they haven't necessarily been nurtured to come forward. So I see part of my role these days is to encourage them, to nurture them, to let them know it's a safe environment. I am not the brightest person in the room. I need my team to come up with answers to the problems I've got from the business. I might be director, but that means I direct the conversation, not direct the answer. Is that fair?
I think that's very fair.
Sorry. I want to agree with Alan, because I think we women sometimes make that mistake, maybe subconsciously, and kind of try and be more masculine and think that that's going to get us far. I think we can play our role in empowering us and other women, is actually showing how much femininity can contribute in management and leadership, because there's so many feminine features that, you know, like the aspect of the woman, what brings in to the table. And just talking about risk management, for example, that we need to promote actually, and remember not to actually, even though it's hard sometimes, because I said it myself, I'm kind of assertive, but I think we need to try and remember ourselves as well to stay feminine and stay what we are. And that way we kind of pave the way for other women to show them actually femininity, works as well, because it brings a different view, it brings a different perspective, and, it works as well.
So this is a good say, because I wanted to go back to one point you guys made earlier, but I want to hire a diverse team because, like Mario said, is very effective and completely, Alan was saying, I don't want to hire female that want or act like it's got to be careful with female versus male. It's actually not female versus male. There's a sort of a more assertive, kind of almost testosterone driven, which actually I've seen in women too, right? So, but there's definitely a percentage, right? There's definitely women do have that more than men. But I think we want a diverse culture because actually it makes better decisions. It actually is better for the business. It actually brings different insights. What I would challenge is that, and I can say I'm speaking now from personal experience, I'm trying very hard to find that diversity, and it's hard. So I would like to know what am I doing wrong, right? Because and to be honest, I'm not going out of my way because of some other things. I'm going out of my way because it's the right thing to do, to try to build that team. But I got the job specs, which are neutral. I'm getting very good feedback on it. I'm getting rid of the CVs as a way to evaluate. I'm getting people to do presentations. I already have data that supports it. Problem is, you still have 90%, right, men applying to this, which is wrong. So the question now is like, what can, basically in this case, not just me, I think there's other individuals in the room here trying to do the same thing, right? What can we do to find that talent, to convince that talent that actually they should apply? Because that's part of the problem. I think part of the problem is that the people that would be amazing candidates today don't put themselves in the ring because they think that it's not for them, or they haven't seen good examples of it. So,
is it a entry-level role, if I may?
No, these are senior. Well, I will, yes, eventually I will also go for entry-level roles, but these are actually senior roles.
Yeah, so that's, I guess, like, the part of the problem is there haven't been a lot of women in the field to start with.
No,
So
but
I
I'm
guess,
looking outside cybersecurity.
Right.
No. So I'm basically
So-
saying, right, I'm actively, in fact, already have candidates who are, for example, general managers at a global store, right? A big brand that you know about. And I was like, wow, that's awesome, right? And that individual has no cybersecurity experience, but has a passion for cybersecurity and is attracted to that lateral move. But I'm not finding enough of that. And my question is, how can I reach to that non-cybersecurity talent pool that will be amazing to join our industry?
Post them into the communities that are specifically for women who are trying to get into tech.
Cool.
More of them.
If I may, we've got to go further than that, because those people who've already expressed an interest are already in our orbit.
Yeah.
We've got to go beyond that orbit to the wider space. And I think we've got to take this message. So what Denise is doing, he's leading the way. You're in that vanguard. I know there are others, but not many. So if you think about the general population, you're actually catching them by surprise because it's not what they're expecting. So somehow we've got to get people to talk about it, but we're talking to the church here. We're talking to the converted. We've got to go out to those heathens who have not yet heard the message. Look, I'm being quite deliberate about that evangelizing type language, because actually that's what I think we need to do, because we've got to go beyond the people in our first and second degree connections. We've got to go to that fourth connection. And to some extent, we've got to go into the business schools where the bright candidates still think they've got to go MBA, they've got to go business, they've got to go sales, because that's where a lot of the bright females go, and we've got to say to them there's another avenue. That's where I think we've got to take the message.
Thank you, Alan. I think Didar is right to say to go and seek out the communities because, yeah, okay, perhaps you want to look beyond cyber, but that's still a valid pool. Why not exploit it? You don't know who's there. You don't know what they've brought to it, what struggles they're experiencing. And also go into colleges, look at tech departments. There's so many career development days, opportunities to find candidates at university level who are changing and re-qualifying as well. But yeah, I think that's just a few things that I've got to add. Sorry, go ahead, Mario.
So I think we are also focusing way too much, generally speaking. So the things that I see companies that are trying actively to do this, I think we are focusing on the wrong type of problem that has a very narrow package of benefits, right? So because it's one thing on trying to reach out and trying to convince someone, look, you can come in, we want to give you an opportunity and we're going to try to do something for you. It's a completely different thing if you think of the problem from a learning organization point of view. And I'm using the word learning organization as Andrew Clay Schaffer talks about it, which is, if you haven't heard, what he says is learning organizations become graduate studies in the skills they require to be successful. If we haven't built the systems internally that can actually train people, that we can say, look, this is the path. You come in, this is how we're going to help you become competent on something that you may feel you aren't right now, right? The problem is, again, as with resilience, it requires preparatory investments, right? We need to do that thing first on how are we a learning organization? How do we bring someone that may be unskilled? Maybe it's not a 10x engineer, right? But they come in because we are learning organizations, we make them competent in the skills that this organization requires to be successful. And I think if we're looking at that problem from that lens, we would have not only many more organizational benefits associated with being a learning organization, but it would make the case to convince someone that may not feel fully competent to take on the challenge to actually say, okay, I can see what the path is. This is probably something that I can do.
And what's really cool about that is that's something that we can work as a community. Because this is interesting, because I'm literally, that's one of the work streams we have, which is to creating a learning path. In fact, we're figuring out how to add the learning path during the recruitment process. The interesting question is, why do we even have to do that? That's something that should exist in the industry. Yes, it doesn't exist, but it should exist. Well, but the learning path. So the question is, I want to do a jump to cybersecurity. That should not be black magic, right? That learning path should be very easy to understand, and that should be very easy mapped, and it should scale.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that because it's about context, right? Because if we take that approach, we're going to go back to what the UK government is doing with the 16 specialisms. That's going to bring more damage than it's going to do benefits, right? Learning organizations become graduate studies in the skills they require to be successful. It's contextual. Sure, it's not picking up, we're going to took you through these certifications and you're going to get there. It's contextual. It's the skills that in the context is required to do that thing successfully.
I think you're throwing the baby with the bathwater, because I would argue that there's a lot of people already in this room that we are very aligned in the context. So I don't think, though I agree that it's wrong if you generalize across the board, I think context at scale also works.
For industry, maybe.
Sorry, I hate to come in here like this, but I'm just really conscious that the discussion is about male and female voices, and we're hearing a lot of male voices, but I'm not sure how it relates to male and female dynamics. Sorry to be a bit controversial.
Yeah, there's so many problems to solve, that's why.
Wait, we've got a comment here.
Also,
Wait,
yeah.
And it's a female comment.
Hello.
Thank you. Hello.
In terms of to your question, I think if you're looking at totally outside cybersecurity, I've done this for 23 years, cybersecurity, you need to tap into not universities because they will not stay for long. And these are the younger generations going to get really bored. So as it is, I've done a lot of research. they think cybersecurity is a really boring industry. That's the reason they don't want to join cybersecurity. So therefore, you have to make it either very attractive to capture the real skills, or the other angle is to look at a total different perspective. Look at healthcare workers who are frustrated, who doesn't want to work in healthcare. Look at mums who have given up their jobs to look after kids, or dads.
We have a video talking about that.
Yeah, I think it's also thinking about the job description. And I think there's a real female resource in returning women from having children. And, you know, like for myself, I've had a 7-year break and now I've entered cybersecurity. I can bring my skills from my past career into cybersecurity now. And I'm glad that the hiring manager actually saw that resource. And I think that's maybe where you want to go, because you have experienced women who are dying to get back into a job, into a function and be productive in society. And they're just thriving and love cybersecurity.
And they're bringing all the skills and talent of being a mom.
Exact incident response.
Exactly.
Stakeholder management.
Not just instant response, business continuity as well.
Exactly. Operations, planning, all of it. It's
Thank you. And great to hear the female voices again. And once you have your required skills base, you've got the women that you want in the positions that you want, sharing their specific feminine skills like empathy. What can you do? What can we do within the sector? What can male voices do to amplify and strengthen women's when they're perhaps threatened?
our CPO just did a talk this week about this, the sponsorship, mentorship, and how can men or women amplify other women. And it's another hour topic, I think, but it's simply helping, mentoring them, and also giving them the opportunities, giving them the exposure, making their names heard in many different contexts, like making sure the other people recognize they're there.
Thank you, Didar.
Yeah, I just want to add another thing he mentioned was, which really I resonated with, was that if you are not doing anything about it, you're putting a hindrance to it. So if you're not actively helping the female voice to be heard, if you're aware that she's struggling to be heard, then you're putting on a hindrance. So make sure you are the alliance and you bring this equity, not just the equality that we have in our land, bring in the equity where we need to lift sometimes some people higher than others to bring in the equity. Yeah. And really resonated.
Thank you, Ayse. I think Alan mentioned, you mentioned earlier, seeking out the quiet person and giving them the space to express themselves, to make themselves heard. What about in conflict situations? Have you ever encountered something where you saw a woman at risk within the sector, or being shushed, I suppose? Being sidelined?
I've seen women sideline themselves, definitely. And that comes to confidence, I think, very often, which is where I think we also need to celebrate successes. Sorry, and I shifted quite some time ago from punishing bad behavior into trying to reward, promote good behavior, whether that's a security awareness program, rewarding a clear desk with chocolate, which had surprising results when I did it 15 years ago, because it got people arguing over why was their desk not considered clean and they didn't get a piece of chocolate. It was an early lesson in gamification and the way you can drive results through success. And I think we need to apply that to encourage, support, promote women into, frankly, all areas of work, not just cybersecurity. So some questions need to be asked to the likes of, I'm going to pick her out, Emma Smith at Vodafone, who's been head of security for 7 years, I think, something of that order. Or Sharon at Lloyds Bank, who's been CISO for 6 years and more, is why are they not talking about their successes more? Because there's nothing quite like seeing somebody, forgive me, in the flesh, who's been there, done it, succeeded, despite all of the barriers, hindrances that were there in the past. They've succeeded, such that the youngsters know it's possible, not just theoretically, but practically. I think we need to do a lot of that. But to create safe space, you know, the Respect and Security Group that's been driven out of some things that have gone wrong. You know, one of the earlier drivers from that was the infamous 4 red dresses at InfoSec in 2019, just completely taking us back, and forgive me, to the notion that sex sells, because that's what it was about. I'd seen that in my early days in InfoSec in the early noughties. We'd moved away from it, and then it just seemed to come in. But it was almost so obvious, it was quite easy to call it out. I think one of the things we have to watch for is the slightly less obvious, the slightly more insidious poor behaviors, bigotry, whatever we want to call it, that still exist, and call that out. But the reluctance to name and shame, and I understand it, but actually we need to hold some people up and pillory them to show others, to dissuade and deter others. But there are all sorts of legal liability issues. But we need to do something around that as well, to make everybody feel safe, that they can have a voice that might be a different voice, that they might say, have you considered? Because if there's one trait that I particularly appreciate from my female colleagues, is that they tend to be more reflective than I am. I'm quite an active thinker. You know, my early career was thinking on my feet and not quite reflexive, but almost, because that was the training we had to go through. I sometimes have to not send an email, sleep on it, and come back to it the next morning. But I've learned, that's learned behavior. I can assure you that's not my natural tendency. Whereas for my female colleagues, it is. And in a sense, they've got to come at it the other way. They've got to be less reflective and more active, but not to the point that they're mirroring my behaviors, because at that point, their value in the team, they've just become the same. And I don't want that. I want differences. I want divergence. So, you know, sorry, I'm slightly rambling, but I've seen that shift, definitely seen that shift. But I think we still need some more punishment about bad behavior.
I think I know what you mean.
To drive that change.
Perhaps accountability would be another word instead of, I mean, punishment, yes, but we saw certain parts of participants in DEFCON being held accountable last year for misogynistic behavior and marketing.
It was only the consequences that drove change. Just making them accountable doesn't do it. It's got to be around.
Yeah, but I think there is a connection between the two, because showing the industry that there are consequences then drives accountability, perhaps.
Well, it certainly drives change in group behavior beyond the individuals. And that's what I think we need to do more of.
Okay, thank you. And Ayse?
I don't think we're punishing anyone, or like, as in talking about what's lacking is definitely not being the most positive about it. But it's having discussion in some way. Let's celebrate our achievements for sure. Let's recognize other things that we haven't seen before. You know, there may be biases that we never noticed. There may be certain behavior that we looked over from women that we work with. And the fact that we're talking about it may make you think next time you're having a conversation with a woman, you know, to keep eye contact, not to refer to general differences all the time, and focus on, you know, what matters the most. And that is the end goal of why we're together in security. Yeah, definitely, let's definitely celebrate. Let's not change ourselves. And that's a defense mechanism, right? It's a defense. It was a defense mechanism for me, because I felt like I needed to change. All I wanted was to be heard. So I was like, I'll act like them and see what it's like, and it worked. So let's have that shift of mindset of what requires to be heard. You know, not just being assertive, but also earning trust. Let's earn trust of each other by having confidence, yes, but also competence and knowledge. Yeah, I think it's really important to highlight the shortcomings, as well as celebrating what we've achieved.
Thank you.
I think that also comes down to the role models. If you have more female role models who are introverts, they don't seem so confident, but they're good at their job, then that shows other people that you can be like that and still be successful and still have authority, and people respect these people. So yeah, we need more role models.
I really like what Ayse said about competence, because that goes back to the discussion about positive discrimination. You know, I want to be hired because I'm competent. And if I'm in a team and I feel that I am competent, I will be empowered to speak up. And this will actually help with the whole image and, you know, making sure that not only men are seen as authority, but women. So that's where I think positive discrimination in a way can sometimes even be damaging, because if you hire someone who's a woman, but maybe they don't have the competence, and you put them in a team and everyone sees that, you're going to put them in an uncomfortable position, you're going to put the team in an uncomfortable position, and it's not going to do anything for the cause.
And it's feeding into the bias as well.
Exactly.
It's just by making bias stronger. You know, I would hate to be the token that's to be used, or, you know, I was called that before. All these experiences were previous companies, by the way. I was called that. I was like, there was an assessment center just as I came out of uni. I was changing careers also after having maternity leave. It really was a blessing to me, because it was like, I liked the work, and then, you know, the circumstances and everything it would offer me was just perfect. And I went into this assessment center not even knowing what the assessment center was. I was the only female, and then came out, and most of them were my classmates, and one of them turned around and said, when the results were, I guess I was let know that I was the one that they wanted to choose. He turned around and said, well, that's because you're a woman. And that is a result of positive discrimination, and that feeds into the bias. Then again, ironically, impacts us, and not the counterpart.
I think that's really important, actually, thinking about the bias and what men say about positive discrimination, and how they accommodate your authority or your right to be there, is really important. And how do you address unconscious bias, or conscious or unconscious bias, really? What Alan was saying about reflection, and how women have been, well, I think studies have shown that women are far more reflective than men, which sometimes can have a negative impact on their confidence, while men spend less time on reflection, perhaps spending more time on reflection, on interactions with women team members, managers, subordinates, would enable a space where they can observe their own behavior and responses to it, and maybe in that way overcome their biases, or at least notice them.
I think there is a need to play to strengths. We all have our strengths, we all have our areas for improvement, and I've just done the consultant thing. It's not a weakness, it's an area of opportunity for improvement. But the idea of women are more reflective and men are more active. In a crisis situation, you need a blend of the two. You haven't got lots of time very often to get all of the answers. So you need to be taking a risk, but it needs to be a considered risk. It needs to be a deliberate risk. And that's where I think a blend of the two personality traits, characteristics, actually really is a sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. But if I can go back to Petra's point about she wants to be competent, yes, but if I'm bringing you in from outside of cybersecurity, I'm doing that more for your potential. Can you grow into the role? Can you pick up that competence in a field that you're new into, because you've got a different background that gives you different strengths? I'm pretty confident that was part of the thinking that got you hired in the first place. So you don't have to match the competence of everybody in the room. You just have to know where your strengths are and where that complements the other people in the room. Because I don't want 6 clones, because I won't get that diverse thinking that gets me to a different solution.
No, I think you hit it spot on, because if you do that, like, as long as you got the support to grow the potential, that's important, and then that doesn't, and that's not kind of like what I'm afraid of, like, because if you're hiring me because of my potential, that's great, and you're going to be there to help me fulfill it, because in some situations I might not be able to answer in a competent way, then that's completely fine, and yeah, then that makes it super powerful.
I think that's a good point about support. I'd like to just come back to that idea about reflection, though, because my background is, as I mentioned many times, in education, and part of the learning process is a very one of the key parts of proceduralizing new ideas or changing ideas is reflection. Reflective learning is a big thing nowadays. I'm just thinking of how we could be more reflective about changing the dynamic, about supporting women's voices more in the sector. Any ideas?
I think we first need to be aware of it, that we need to be reflective, and what we need to be reflective about, then we can get there potentially. I wish there was like a pill that we could make everyone swallow, and there's awareness.
The red pill.
Yeah, there's awareness of the stuff and biases and our unconscious biases.
I think this is a really great conversation, but we are massively overrunning. So I think, Danusia, if you want to.
Yeah, sorry, I can't see the clock, so. Can we open up the discussion to the floor briefly? Or
Yeah. Let's do a quick wrap up.
Yeah. So, any questions on, especially the last point, but anything else that you've heard tonight, or any comments? Okay. Yes.
I'll maybe finish on a slightly controversial one. And first, I'll say, Alan, I really appreciate and respect what you said, but I want to come back to your point about the 2 examples you gave of the long-standing CISOs, the 2 females. A lot of what we were talking about here in terms of amplifying female versus male voices, a lot of the conversation seems to turn back to what can the females do to amplify their own voice. And so the comment that you'd made is, why are they not talking more about their success, which I absolutely agree with. But what are you, what are I, what are the men who generally are in the powerful positions, the leaders, doing to make sure they're able to amplify their voice, be it nominating for awards, making sure that they've got positions on committees, boards, speaking. So for example, you get nominated to speak. Do you ask, who else has this been offered to? I'm just trying to say, ultimately for us as the males in the room to encourage the, not just female, but more diverse voices, what we can actively do on that point.
The race for the mic.
Well, I don't necessarily want to go first here, but I suppose it was directed at me to start with. So, I picked on Emma and Sharon as examples of two leaders, both of them in FTSE 20 companies, and they've been in those roles for some time, so clearly they've been successful. But actually somebody said, though, why are they quiet? It's because they're both introvert characters, and they've still been successful. So actually I'm picking on them as examples to show, to Didar's point, you do not have to be an extrovert to be successful. And I think that's quite important. But to the next point about what have we done, absolutely. So Rick Ferguson, for example, who's another person I look up to, just left Trend Micro, he refuses to join a panel and has done for nearly 9 months now, if there isn't an equal number of female and male voices. Now, actually, that's quite hard. So if it doesn't happen, I've twice now forced the moderator, event organizer to say they tried, i.e. to acknowledge that there's a need, but were unable for whatever reason to get a mixed panel. And if you notice here, we're actually in the minority, which is good. So and that's what I mean about this has changed. This has definitely changed. And we're on the last panel of the evening, 3 hours in, and yet we're still talking about it. And it's a Friday night. I don't come into London on a Friday very often. I don't come in for work on a Friday evening unless it's a crisis. And yet I'm here doing this panel because it's important. So I'd like to think we are all matching words with actions. And I think we just need to show that that is not exceptional, that is normal, and make it normal.
Sorry. I didn't want to finish on a very controversial note. I just wanted to say something about positive discrimination before I make my statement. Being someone who values external opinion about myself, I completely agree about the fact that I would much rather be hired because of my competency rather than because I'm a woman. What I would say is that generally positive discrimination is implemented in environments where there isn't a structure in place that wants this equality, that wants this equity, which means that if it wasn't there, women would never have the opportunity to actually be hired in that kind of space. That's the first point. The second is when positive discrimination is in place, it's not some random guy that comes to a woman saying, come get this job, we need women. Women are actually applying. So they should think that they're ready, that they have the competence for the job, that they can take it on. And in that sense, even if they are hired because they are a woman, so what? If they believe they have the competence in place to do the job that they're applying for, then at least it's an opportunity for them to prove their worth inside of company where people didn't actually think that that's what they could achieve. Sorry, that was a bold statement. I'm open to conversation. It's just there was a very one-sided vision of positive discrimination. And I know it's a controversial topic, but I think that's something that needs to be said.
Thank you. I think that was a very interesting point, actually. I think we hadn't considered that.
Yeah, I'd love to end with that.
just before we go away, I just want to mention reflection again in answer to your question about what men can do. I think how we reflect is we can think back upon interactions that we've had within our teams, within interviews, within these sorts of events and think, how much airtime did I give to my colleagues? I'm not giving that much right now, I'm aware. So I can see Manos laughing there. But, you know, what part of the debate was owned by what person? And then sort of go from there, really. Anything else? Any final thoughts? Where's the bar? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think that's a wrap.